is on, I think. Chairman and I were visiting. So what we'd like to do, folks, is just go down through every one of these topics. If there's members of the committee that didn't make the deadline on a submission or whatever, you can bring your topic up. We'll put those all in a list, and then we'll fill out like a little Google survey for members of the committee, and you can just kind of rate what you want to, and we'll get that to Chairman and I, and we'll pull this all together and plan the interim after we're done. But we'll take your ratings, and so we're not going to make any decisions on any of these this morning. We're just going to hear them out. Okay. All right, Mr. Chairman, what do you think? Everything?
We're good, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. We'll just start here at the top. Is vehicle salesperson's license. Sarah Cox, not here. Anybody know anything? You can read it there. That's an interesting concept, actually. Yeah. Okay, almost corporations committee topic as well. Any comments on that? Folks have any thoughts or comments on vehicle salesperson's license? Okay, nobody online. How about the next one is this electricity gross receipts tax. Senator Case. Anybody want to visit about that? Yeah, go ahead, Representative Swanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just know your previous revenue committee in former years, about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, did look through this concept about how we can pass on costs to generally out-of-staters, but it, how do I say it nicely? It's extremely complicated, and there's a lot of math involved. And so we did have LSO previously work up estimates and studies that said we could raise up to 100 to 150 million a year on some of these kind of pass on electric generation taxes that we passed on to other states. That concept, I think, Senator Case, is now kind of combined with what other states call a gross receipts tax, similar to that corporate income tax we looked at as a committee a couple of years back as well. And so I think the good senator, from what I remember, is really just trying to find a way to increase revenue to the state and not charge Wyoming residents. I think it was 5 to 8% fell on us, and the vast majority of the revenue coming in would be us charging other states for our electricity mix as they continue to put on some of these standards that Wyoming doesn't have. So it's a fascinating topic, but it certainly would take a considerable amount of time. But if it would work in actuality, it would probably still be 100 million or so to the state. So that's what I remember of it. We took a look at it in interim about 5 years ago, and I think it just got so complicated. People said we're not the time then. But I think Senator Case wants to bring it back.
The committee, thank you, Chairman Swanson. The committee looked at this last interim a little bit too. We kind of ran out of time again. I think a couple key points on this. As you read the items to consider there, our coal generation pays a significant tax burden. And I think that's really the issue. And as you read through this, at the bottom of page 1, full tax credit allowed against any liability or tax on income, full credit on flipping over to ad valorem, sales use, all those things are, so that's his idea. So as we export 60 to 70% of our electricity out of state, and you think about our largest producer in the state, every state they operate in, they have a corporate income tax. And so we've tried to get around this with a generation tax on wind and those kind of things, but this is kind of a holistic approach. This is the tax on generation. There's credit for any other taxes you paid, and now everybody's kind of on the same page, kind of same footing. So it's a fascinating topic, and we are experts in Wyoming of having out-of-staters pay our taxes. I mean, every state tries to do that. and we're really good at it, actually. So, but anyway, so that's, any other conversation on that or discussion? Mr. Chairman, any thoughts on that or any?
No.
Okay, flipping over to page 2 then, the next one is the State Liability Associated Wyoming Retirement System under complete control of investments. I think there's currently about $10 billion, or not unfunded liability, there's about $3 billion or so unfunded liability. But I think we've already kind of solved that problem. We've got a plan with increased what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, actually, we've increased the amount of participation by both the employer and the employee. And that's gonna all come to about 100% at 2033 or 34, 35, somewhere in there. And we've passed a state law where there's no COLAs given unless it's approved by the legislature. And where previously, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when we changed the law, it was, the retirement board could give out COLAs. Anyway, any more discussion about it? Okay. Okay, next one, Representative Bear, why don't you talk about that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a local concern, and actually I think it applies to the entire state, but in my community, we have a horse track. And of course, I believe everyone here knows that the idea of pari-mutuel and off-track betting is and was brought into the state in an effort to support the ag community and in particular horse racing in the state of Wyoming. And so during the COVID pandemic, we experienced a problem where we had opened up in our community the ability to have the races, and yet the particular corporation that we were contracted with in our county failed to perform during that time. And so our county commission, in an effort to try to get the ball rolling again, began to contract with another corporation that would hold the races. And then in an effort to support that, they chose to shut down the off-track betting within our county of that previous organization that was not supporting the horse racing. And so that's gone through quite a bit of litigation now, and the courts have determined that the counties do not have the ability to cancel those contracts. So this is an interim topic that I hope we can pick up. I don't think it'll take a lot of effort. There's already been quite a bit of adjudication on it. It's just a matter of making a policy decision that local governments will have the opportunity to cancel contracts as well as start contracts.
Okay, thank you. I think, there's no doubt, I think, when I think of the late, Senator Schiffer and good representative from Gillette, Sue Wallace, Lord rest both their souls. I think when they brought this, I think it's changed dramatically from what they thought. I mean, that's just, we used to have horse racing in Casper. And so, okay, appreciate you bringing that topic to us. Any other discussion, anybody in the audience? Yeah, come forward if public comment on any of these. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. Appreciate the representative bringing this topic forward. You may remember the topic of museum, fair boards, and the like, and counties not having the power to undo that decision or alter that decision. As the representative indicated, we just learned in the last 2 weeks, we got the same decision out of the Supreme Court, somewhat expected, and we are interested in advancing this topic. We've submitted this actually to the TRW committee as well. So whoever takes it up will be there to participate, but we do support you, or at least the legislature, evaluating this issue.
Raymond? Okay, thank you. Any other comments on this topic? Okay, committee, any further discussion? Questions? Okay. Moving over to page 3. This is just a continuation of a topic we had in the last, in the 66th. Because primarily we're like every other state. We fund education, K-12 education with property taxes. And the issue in Wyoming is mineral companies pay most of the property taxes. And so you have, and it's based on the, you know, on the valuation that day, 100% valuation. And so there's a volatility piece that is really, is really unique to Wyoming. So our, you know, our revenues in general are, you know, perhaps the most volatile, or at least certainly in the top 3, us and Alaska and maybe North Dakota, but particularly on this property tax thing. So last year, or last interim, we basically had proposals brought to us. We solicited proposals, and the tribes brought one for Class 3 gaming. We had another one on renewable energy brought to us. So anyway, that's just something I put in there. And any questions or any comments, anybody in the audience want to comment or? Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead. Senator
Yeah, I think we ought to continue it and continue to request additional proposals from folks out there. We need to continue asking our constituents, our industries, anybody who's got any ideas, because we really need to tackle this. So I'm hoping we can put the word out and ask folks to come up with proposals, additional proposals other than the ones we saw last interim.
Okay. Yeah, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to make a comment. I too support this effort to try to find other sources, but I would love to see this topic sort of expanded and moved to a higher level so that maybe we can drive eventually down to an area that revenue could be sourced in a consistent way, and then ask for suggestions within a smaller scope rather than just across the spectrum. Because I believe no matter what your political spectrum, where you're at on the political spectrum, we all would like to have consistent sources for revenue. And that's the problem we have here, and that's what this topic is trying to address. But if we had, you know, an overreaching plan that said, you know, this is where we want to go to stabilize our revenue sources, and then drill down from there to say, okay, here's where we're lacking, and here's potential areas where there's a more consistent type of revenue source stream, then maybe we could go to the people in that area, the experts in that area, and ask them specifically and get a lot more feedback. And that's what we're looking for in this topic, is trying to get some feedback from the good people of Wyoming. What should we do? But if we had a plan, maybe it'd be a little easier to get participation.
Okay, any other discussion? Any members of the public? Oh, Representative Storer, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just concur with that. I think looking at tax policy generally is something that this committee is properly in the place to do. And just being able to see where our income's coming from, where our revenues are. I know there's been a lot of discussion, but I do agree with Representative Bear that kind of taking this at a bigger level makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, thank you. The next one, I think state trust lands are kind of looking for a home. A lot of times ag has taken this issue on. They're certainly not grazing lands, although most of them are used for grazing. They're trust lands in our Constitution for to maximize revenue. And I'm not talking about selling trust lands. We were originally given about a little over 4 million acres at statehood. I think we're at 3.2 or something like that is left. So unfortunately, we've sold a bunch of them. And but I think we have some, I just we want to always make sure that that incredible, valuable trust is working as hard as it can for the children. I mean, that's what it's there for. And I think continue to look at statutes that can help our state land board, the 5 electeds. And again, this isn't about selling. We don't want to sell any of it, right? We have some of the most valuable parcels in the world in Teton County. Certainly don't want to sell those. I mean, I go back to the 80s, the Broyles Hill section that was sold is probably a classic case of how not to do it. And we certainly don't want to repeat that. And, but anyway, I just think I think this issue, these state lands are looking for a committee, I think. And it's bounced around a little bit, ag, minerals, and that's why I put it in there. Whether it lands in this committee, who knows, but, so that was the point there. But any other, Representative Storr?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would agree. I think the discussion of state trust lands does belong at the Revenue Committee here. And as the good chairman knows, the approach that the department has taken in Teton County to developing those parcels has been quite controversial. There are certainly a lot of my constituents that believe that there are better ways to go about increasing revenues and protecting the long-term interests of the corpus than the process currently underway. I do, and also the amount of legislation we saw related to state trust lands, I think does mean that we should take another look at this and see if we can come to some agreement about what is appropriate and what is really in the long-term interests of the state. So I would welcome that discussion.
Any other discussion? Anybody here in the audience? Anybody like to discuss this? I think, we hear a lot about the housing, the residential housing crunch. And, we've had these proposals to put tens of millions of dollars in the general fund. There are some incredible state sections right next to some of our larger towns where the state could, long-term lease those. And so there's a lot of areas that are incredible that could be developed for our state to generate revenue. And that's our constitutional charge to do that. But anyway, that's why that's in there. Okay, flipping over a page. Next one, I just put in gaming, and there's another little topic out there looking for a committee. It was with TRW, and they're like, hey, truce, we don't want it anymore. In the 66. I don't know what the 67. I'm not saying we didn't want it necessarily, but I just put it out there. Yeah, it's a fun topic. We could talk all day about it. But so that's why I put it in there. I just think it's looking for a home, and the previous committee chairman of TRW said, we want you guys to have it. So that was it. Any discussion on that? Senator?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I agree. Nobody wants it, and probably for a good reason. It may end up in our committee, Mr. Chairman, probably because it needs to be in revenue, but I'd hate to have it chew up all of our time when I think a lot of us here really want to take a deep dive and look at the whole tax structure in general and kind of how we go about our tax code, cleaning up our tax code. And I think we have a great opportunity to do that with this committee, this joint committee, and looking at education funding and stability of funding sources. I think if we dive into the gaming realm, this could easily take up a lot of our time. And I would pump the brakes on it, but I'm interested to hear what the rest of the committee thinks about it.
Representative Storr?
A question, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious, being new, and we did see some bills in TRW this session as well. But, is there one particular issue in the gaming realm that that needs to be addressed. I'm just curious.
Yeah. Senator Pappas?
Mr. Chairman, I have to agree with Senator Beitman. This topic, being on the sub-working group, working last year on that particular proposal from the tribes, that was a lot of time and effort. I mean, we met, every 2 weeks online, just to discuss it. So I think if anyone tries to tackle it, it actually belongs in a task force or some entity of its own. I think we'll just spin our wheels and eat up a lot of time in this committee. So, I think it's probably valuable to look at, but I think a task force or some other entity needs to take it up, not the Revenue Committee.
Okay. Yeah. GRW doesn't want it? We don't want it? No, I think we'll see if we want it. So it'll be on your little, see what Management Council tells us to study. But, okay, so that's why I put that in there. That's not something I'm getting up early in the morning wanting to do every morning. So, okay, the next deal I just put in there, members of the committee, was just a concept. I mean, as I look at the, as I look at our, we've got a lot of new members in the 67th, and something that we did, that we did 15 years ago for about 10 years or better, and we've kind of quit when we hit the crunch in 15, 16. We'd take surplus revenues and we would match them. We'd put, whether community colleges or university or other state programs or local programs to try to, and really I call it kind of the whole celebration of capitalism. I mean, when we're in a boom and there's excess revenues, people in the state are incredibly generous, particularly when they make a donation and it's matched, it's doubled. And I just think we've kind of, there's not many folks left in the legislature remember those days. We've done a lot of good with that. We've done a lot of good, programs and facilities and around the state and every county and every community really. And I think there's a good chance we're going to have another substantial surplus next year. And I'm not talking, I don't know what the number would be. I think we'd talk about that and think about it, what the need is out there. But there was a time in the last, I'll say 15 years, because we haven't done it really for the last 5, 6 years. We've been broke, but incredibly successful. And so anyway, just something I kind of had on my brain I put in there. But any comments on that? Not a very long topic, really. Any comments, folks in the audience? Okay. Next one here is Chairman Brown. Deep dive into exemptions. Well, I think we've certainly done the work, and it'd be a review for the committee, and I think it is always good. I mean, you look at the other 4 or 5 states that are non-income tax states, and look how they operate their sales tax, which is really our sales and property tax. It's pretty incredible. Any other comments on that, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I think this is a great topic for our committee for the interim. I think it ties in well with what Senator McEwen was working on with the personal property tax and getting rid of that and trying to figure out how to unwind it. The Senate was very receptive of Senator McEwen's bill, but there was concern over the fiscal note coming with it, that we weren't offsetting all that revenue that was lost. And they said, well, if you come back after the interim with a bill to, tie in get rid of some of these exemptions, offset the repealing of the personal property tax, we have a deal. And so we said, well, we'll take you up on that. We'll go to the interim and we'll come back with some comprehensive tax reform package that will be close to revenue neutral. And we'll look at these exemptions and we'll come back with that. So I think this is a great topic for what we've tried to do this session and going into the interim with our directive from the body as a whole, the Senate as a whole, and I think this is what they want us to look at.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I have to ditto everything that Senator Biteman said. We discussed the tangible property tax, or the business property tax, and it's a tax that's really difficult to administer. And I think pretty much everybody wants to see it go away. Certainly our mineral industry, and a lot of folks there that have a lot of property, but it is a significant burden when we get rid of it. I mean, we lose a lot of money. And so I think this topic, along with a few others that I think Senator Biteman have later on, all dovetail real well together, and a big look at all the types of taxes we impose and the exemptions we allow. Yeah, I think we need to take a big look at it.
Okay.
I agree. This is a good topic we need to.
Okay, Senator McHugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to see us, as we delve into this, we're talking about surpluses in here earlier. And I can see the need to backfill some of it, but I'd like us to take a hard look at some of it, because I think there's some areas that we may not need to be taxing that we are, if you will, or we're overtaxing. And if we can identify those, that would also help relieve the pressure off of getting rid of that property tax. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I think that bill passed House Revenue 4 or 5 years ago, where we were close, actually, and the same thing, it comes to that, that fiscal note at the end. So it's been an issue, it's been around certainly a long time. Anybody in the audience want to comment on this? And I think Representative Brown's issue is primarily sales tax. That's what he's talking about here in this proposal, and it's about exemptions and more of a kind of broaden that tax and then lower. I think we tax like 50, 60 services. I think South Dakota taxes 150, Texas over 200, and so I think that's part of that. If you can broaden that, can you lower the rate actually? And so I think that was his, really, the bill he brought. And I agree, it goes into all issues, really, property tax as well. So, okay, no other comment on that? Okay, the next one is by Ms. Herman on school trust lands. Proposed interim topic, really what we kind of just talked about, same thing. And you read her comments, she submitted this also to Minerals, Business and Economic Development. Okay. Any discussion on that? Okay. And then the next one, Representative Locke, why don't you talk about your proposal there?
Well, I'm gonna bring back a topic from the previous interim. And that's came out as House Joint Resolution 1, where we're looking to split residential and real property out from the other category. And in this particular case, I'm proposing that we do that, but along with that option to potentially cap if that's something that down the road we saw as a value. So again, I'm just bringing that back for further discussion, and maybe to see what other, if there are any other items we need to look at in that context. So that's the what I've proposed here.
Okay. Any discussion? Senator?
Yeah, I think obviously property tax being a hot topic this session, and noticing that any major reform like this, you're proposing to split out the residential is going to take a constitutional amendment to get it done. So I think it would be a good time to spend some little time in the interim to look at what needs to be done and what we would want to accomplish, because we're probably only gonna get one bite at that apple if we do decide to go that route. So entertaining the notion of a cap, I mean, if we do it, we can do whatever we want. We just got to get it all in that proposed amendment, and that's what the policy decision is going to be. So I think it might be worth spending a couple hours talking about it.
Any other?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we started that work in the last interim. Certainly, we discussed it, and it was a topic that I think was certainly, if not agreeable to all, it was at least worthy of looking at. There were some pros and cons against it. I think there were more pros for it, as I heard the testimony in interim. And so, yeah, I'd like to continue looking at that option, splitting it out. It just gives us more flexibility.
Okay, any other discussion? Representative Storr?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we should just see where we end up at the end of the session on property tax. And I do think we want to make sure we spend a little bit of time towards the end of the interim reviewing how the bills that do pass and making sure we get a report from the Department of Revenue on who applied, how much they requested, and just to be able to continue to look at property tax structures we've created and be able to bring some new ideas if needed and tweak it. So I would agree with that.
Okay, further discussion? Anyone here in the audience like to visit about this topic? I think, I think the other part of this issue, and I've heard the Director of Department of Revenue talk about this, is really how you link mills to this and how you link mills to your budget. If you've got a surplus, then lower the mill rate. And currently county commissioners can do that, but we really don't have a way to do that at the state level. And I think and then that thing can float a little bit. Hey, we've got a little surplus, let's knock 3 mills off this year. And it works pretty quickly. I think the issue when you link caps and a new class together, those are two giant issues. And I think when you link them together, it makes it tough. I think those can ride together or ride separately, right? Pretty good. But I think when you link them together, that's a big deal. And a lot of times it gets too big and crashes under its own weight a little bit. So, but I think the mills is another part of that. So, any other discussion? Anybody here would like to further discussion? Okay. You guys want to carry that on outside or? Okay. All right. Okay. We're moving over to the next page. I think, is that right? Representative Locke, anything else on that? And we've got time, of course, next session, to get it ready for the ballot. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just briefly, I do agree that looking at that, some of those issues more broadly is certainly what I had in mind. I was really putting it in there more as a somewhat of a placeholder, at least with a couple of ideas, but I agree, thinking more broadly and obviously looking at it and expanding that. So I wasn't trying to put a box around it as much as I was trying to get us a topic that a point of focus to get us moving forward, but thank you.
I appreciate it. Okay. I saw Ms. Herman, we talked about your topic about 3 minutes before you got here. Do you want to add anything to that? We really have 2 proposals on state lands, just looking for a home committee. So we'll back up a topic here. Go ahead. Good morning.
Thank you, co-chairman and committee, and I appreciate the forbearance. I just testified on a similar topic over in joint minerals. I will just say that in the past, school trust lands, which as we all know, were given to the state, granted to the state as statehood for the main purpose to serve the beneficiaries, i.e. public schools. So that being the priority, and has typically been heard in ag committee, joint ag, and I see some members here, they're familiar with it, and they've done a good job at making the lands itself available to ag production. But I think this committee would be the appropriate place to look at use of the land to produce revenue, of course, that's number one, but also to look at other uses outside of ag production, commercial, residential, all those other things that could be a good, could advance the state business economic opportunities and enhance the revenue for the beneficiaries. So I suggest that you take a look at it. One thing that came up during the during the session was residential leases, which involved extending the lease time, and there was other factors involved in that. And I think OSLI has done a lot of work on that, has a lot. So I don't think you'd have to reinvent the wheel. I think you could use a lot of what they're doing, the success, failures, what they've learned for other states, and turn that into policy. I think it would not consume too much of your resources. But anyway, I think revenue would be an appropriate place to look at those other uses.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, appreciate it. And I think, you know, we sometimes don't realize, but there is, one of the largest truck stops on I-80 is on a school lands and generating revenue. I mean, there's tremendous opportunities out there.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and I would just say, you know, that one of the things about residential leases is making land available to cities and towns, municipalities for affordable housing, which we all know communities are struggling with, and that maybe hold things back business-wise for various places in the state. So if that could be, even if it's limited to that, but it would be nice to look even broader than the residential.
Okay, very good. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, we're going to flip forward, and I think Representative Locke, and I would just like to just add to that. You have caps, new property class, and I'd like to put like variable mill levies, just to kind of study that so we can learn about that. Is that all right, committee? Yes. We'll just, and you know, we have a cap on mills already in our state. You know, they're capped, but I think there's a way to work those with our budget. In a surplus, you can lower the mills quickly. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, of course, that's all based on the way we do tax, and that's based on assessed value. And it was brought forth by some of the county assessors that maybe we ought to actually look at budget. There's a system out there where they get away from, and I don't know much about it. It's something I'd like to learn about it, rather than assessed value, we create a budget, and your taxes are based to meet that budget. And so some other states are doing it. Frankly, maybe we ought to be looking at it, but it would dovetail into,
I think we're saying the same thing.
in this type
I mean,
of
we're gonna have
topic.
to assess it uniformly.
Yeah, but I think it's
100%.
it's a complete different system. It's not just being able to vary the mills. I think it's a whole different system. And I don't know whether we have the time to actually to look at a whole new system that gets away from assessed value, but
I'm going to ask Director Henson to come on up and talk about that. I mean,
yeah, that'd be
we're-
good, because
our
I know very little
Constitution,
about it.
Yeah. Go ahead. Morning, Director.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Brenda Henson, Director of Revenue. To your point, Senator Pappas, the majority of the taxing entities out there, whether it's a improvement and service district, counties, municipalities, they are doing budget-based taxation. And that's where you take their budget amount, and then you divide that by the assessed value to calculate a mill levy. We do have caps, as Chairman Beitman has indicated, and Chairman Harshman. We do have caps on those, so fire districts can only levy up to 3 mills. In the Constitution, when we talk about the Constitution, our counties and municipalities, those maximums are in our Constitution. So if we're going to change those, we need to address it in that manner. However, education is that piece where for every piece of property in the state of Wyoming, we require that the 12 mills for the school foundation be assessed. We require that the 25 mills be assessed. We require that the 6 county mills for education be assessed. So that's 43 mills. We're not even talking about community colleges and the rest of our education structure. So to delve into that topic and see if there's a way that we can look at education and how we're funding it and be able to say on a statewide basis, okay, we know in that June timeframe what our total assessed value is. It's looking at that budget amount and seeing as a state, could we create a structure? And this wouldn't take constitutional change. Could we create a structure by which there's a, whether it's legislative action where we look at what's the total budget that's needed for education and we divide that. And then perhaps it's the State Board of Equalization that then tells county assessors, you need to levy, 11.5 mils for school foundation, not the full 12. So I think there's opportunity there that could be discussed and possibly implemented without a constitutional change related to that. But again, when you change the mill levy, you're talking about all taxable value. And so if you're reducing that mill levy, mineral industry also is benefited by that. And so I'd be excited to talk about that topic
Yeah.
with the committee.
Okay, so we'll just add that, kind of that variable mill. Is that a way to say that, variable mill levies? Really, it doesn't affect the valuation process. You're still we're Constitution, we got to evaluate things uniformly and 100% valuation, fair market value.
That's true, Mr. Chairman, but it may possibly also dovetail with your how do we fund education
Yeah.
piece, just in general. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, since the next topic is
Are you
related,
next?
may I
Okay,
save a few steps?
sure. Okay, Representative Zwanitzer.
While Director Henson's here, I would just turn it over to her, Mr. Chairman. Thanks.
We're on page 6. Folks, page 6, right in the middle. Okay, go ahead, Director. Perfect
Mr.
time.
Chairman and Administrator Fanning, if you would join me. I really appreciate Representative Zwanitzer agreeing to sponsor this topic about excise tax licensing. As you all know, our entire tax structure in Wyoming is based on self-reporting. And when you look to our statutes and we're requiring, it's one thing for those of us that administer the tax to understand the tax structure and the requirements, but we're requiring vendors, those retailers, those folks that are required to report to us to understand what their responsibilities are. And with that, I'll let Mr. Fanning talk a little bit more about excise tax licensing and that process and some of the things that we're seeing, because as you know, our economy has changed and perhaps our tax structure has not. So Mr. Fanning.
Hey, Mr. Fanning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Brett Fanning, I'm the Excise Revenue. So this is, in my small world, this is a fascinating topic. And so just put it into perspective. So in 2015, so just 8 short years ago, we had 16,000 sales tax licenses, 16,000 and change. So last year, so 2022, we had 42,000 sales tax licenses. And so we have more than doubled our sales tax licenses in just the past decade. And so what is spurring that change? What is causing it? And so just piggybacking off of what Director Henson said, so you've got who's required to get licensed here in the state of Wyoming. Is it different if you're in the state of Wyoming versus you're a remote seller or marketplace facilitator? And so then this couples with a Supreme Court decision that came out a few years ago, which said, hey, once upon a time, it used to be if you had a physical location in our state, you had the license. It's a game changer now. That is no longer what's happening here in the state of Wyoming. How do our tax-friendly laws in the corporate statutes and our LLC statutes, how is that playing into this dramatic rise in these licenses that we have here in the state of Wyoming? And then, so we've got licensing for craft shows, garage sales, the little lemonade stand on the side. How do those thresholds play into licensing here at the Wyoming Department of Revenue? And so then you've got, there was a conversation about online parity, online competition, online fairness. How does that all play into this role as far as licensing? So maybe you've got tobacco wholesalers. That was a big topic that we heard through the legislative session. How do they play into this licensing requirement? And so that, with that, Mr. Chairman, this is kind of this dynamic in my little small world. It is something that's changed. And Director Henson was actually the one who said, the legislature, they've got to at least have a discussion on this topic and see if it's what they want. And with that, the department would stand for any questions.
Okay, any questions? Interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating. Here's our problem, you know, we're gonna get a couple days meetings. We could spend all interim on this topic. I mean, we're gonna have to spend some time, but it's just, I don't know.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman,
Yeah, go ahead.
even if we got guidance within the statutes to
Right,
say that the sales at a garage sale are not taxable events,
yeah,
because we are not, I don't feel comfortable exempting transactions when it's not really clearly defined in statute.
sure.
But I also recognize someone saying, well, we've never done that. Well, I don't think that that's good enough. I think that that is a policy decision that you all should make, not the Director of Revenue.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Anybody, any public comment on this? Okay, on to the next, Senator Chairman Biden.
Thank you, Co-Chairman. This topic, I was frantically typing these in at 4 o'clock on Friday, thinking I had to have them in or else I'd miss the boat. So I apologize for being so brief, but this first one, lowering property taxes in general. You know, we tried this session to do that, but I think we ultimately failed to provide broad property tax relief, looking at residential and all other categories, as well as the industrial, because we heard in testimony on the Senate revenue side from industry that the oil and gas and coal, they pay the lion's share of that industrial rate. And so when we talked about trying to lower the residential and all other categories, you know, the Taxpayers Association came and said, well, that's not equitable because you're shifting more of the burden onto the industry. So I said, well, during the interim, let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at, you know, what would it look like to knock everybody down 1% and see what would the fiscal impact of that be? So you're not shifting that burden even more so onto the oil and gas industry. So that's the idea behind this proposal. It's just another, I want to take that broad look. We have a lot of new committee members on revenue, and I think it would be a good exercise for us to look at that and hear everybody out and take public comment on it.
Okay, any questions? Discussion, any folks here in the audience would like to? Okay, yeah, okay, yeah, Senator I.
Thank you, Chairman. Arjun Beitman. This is probably more of philosophical input, but government's tendency is to grow. And I think as a revenue committee, the goal should be to defend the taxpayer. That's who we're working for here. That's who funds all of this. You know, lowering, we struck out on property tax stuff this session. And we added $1 billion to spending from the budget last year. That's what happens when we have a lot of easy, funny money that comes from Washington, and we had a good surplus this year. So I like what Senator Beitman has here on this, and I think our committee, this interim, should focus on, you know, defending the people that fund this government. I think it's grown too big, too much regulation, too much taxes, and we need to work for the people that fund all of this. So that's more of a philosophical statement, but I think that should be a focus of this committee. Thank you, Chairman Beitman, Harshman.
Representative Law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to, you'd mentioned at the beginning that we might be able to add some things in, which of course, I was a little bit like the senator and doing it at the last minute, did a poor job. But one of the things I was thinking we should look at was I was going to toss in some of those homestead exemption examples, which I think there were a couple of them. There was, and I'm just gonna, House Bill 54, I know House Bill 98, I think, was one of those that was kind of going through the system. Is this kind of a place for a more of a catch-all to where we can take a look at all of those options? Is that what this bullet tends to be? I'm more asking, is that the right place rather than creating 3 or 4 of these? Do we create a somewhat of a catch-all to take a look at all of those options and roll them in and say, hey, what really makes sense? So I'm kind of tossing that out as a thought and and an option. I just want to get a feel for that.
Yeah, I don't see why not. I think broadly is looking at property tax reform. That includes a lot of all the different categories of property tax and these homestead exemptions, because I was a fan of those. I thought that was a good approach, and I think that should be something we can consider in this whole umbrella of property tax reform in general. So that'd be a friendly amendment there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to on Senator Ide's point, you know, we do need to look out for our taxpayers. You know, we're all taxpayers as well. But the issue, I think, for us, and I don't know if it's us as a revenue committee, but it's certainly us as the legislature, we need to identify what government should look like in Wyoming. What is the right size government, right? Some of us want more, some of us want less, right? We need to identify that right size government. But when we do, I believe we then need to adequately fund it and find mechanisms to do that. So the key is not so much, you know, just looking to reduce the tax burden. We should do that if we can. But if we decide we need government to provide these services, and maybe we provide too many, I don't know. That's what we need to do. But when we do, we just need to figure out mechanisms that we adequately fund government. Government should do certain things and government should not do certain things. And so, again, that's probably a bigger task than just this revenue committee. But we as a legislature, I think, need to figure out what government should look like in Wyoming. And then we as the revenue committee should come up with ways to figure out how we're going to raise revenue to fund it.
Okay, how about the next topic, severance tax? Oh, I'm sorry, Senator McCowan. That is, yeah, my apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we take this dive into property taxes and our sales tax, I would really like us to take a critical look at what we're doing. We tend to, in order to protect revenue, take a little dice out of here and a little slice of pie out of there, and we end up with a situation like the tax refund. If you make $75,000 or more a year, you're not eligible for it. But if you make $74,999, you're going to get a tax break. And also, in my opinion, what we're doing is creating haves and have-nots and almost rewarding negative behavior. So as we look at tax policy in the interim, I would love to see us do it across the board in a fair manner. Instead of giving somebody 4%, somebody 2%. And I'll be the first to admit, a lot of this stuff is very, very complicated. But it seems to me we could look at the tax structure and actually do some reform and simplify it. And then it's defendable also. We give everybody, and I'm just throwing numbers out, so don't write this in the Cowboy State Daily that Senator McEwen says everybody in Wyoming needs a 3% tax cut. But whatever that looks like, how we're going to fund it, it should go across the board. If you're successful and you're making quite a bit of money, you still deserve a tax cut, just like the people who are not quite as successful. And I think if we make it fair and transparent, it makes it quite a bit easier. So as we look at these issues, I would kind of implore everybody to put that lens on it as they look and see if we can just provide it for the state and not just certain groups. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, any other discussion? Tax parity?
That's a good segue right there. Couldn't have come up with a better one than that. That's the way when I look at severance tax rates and they're across the board, they don't make any sense whatsoever. And to Senator McEwen's point about people paying different rates and getting treated differently, this is a prime example. When you look at our severance tax rates, we've got coal paying a different rate than oil and gas, some not even paying any at all, Mr. Chairman. And so I think we look at the severance tax rate, we set a rate across the board and stick with it, whatever that rate is, but that way it's fair and it's something that's defensible and it's not picking winners and losers, and it doesn't have the perception of picking winners and losers. It's just a flat rate for all severance tax. And I think that's a discussion I'd like to have on this revenue committee. I don't think it would take a whole lot of time, and I think it's a policy that would go a long way to cleaning up our tax code and making it more easy to read, more fair, and broad-based. Any thoughts?
Questions, folks? Anybody in the audience? I think, I've heard the word fairness from two senators here and a lot. I think fairness, though, is, in the eye of the beholder. I mean, if you believe flat tax is fair, then it's fair. But if you believe a graduated tax is fair, then that's fair. And so I think these are all the debates. I think on these differing rates on severance, those go back before many of us were even born. Certainly for, many of us lived here. And a lot of that is, how much does it cost to produce the mineral? What's the profit margin on the mineral? How much of the mineral is there? I mean, when the severance on coal used to be 13%, first got started. I mean, that was for all the impacts to Gillette and Campbell County and the state to pay for this infrastructure and do all that. So, and it's gradually come down. I mean, uranium used to be higher until it went to nothing. And how can you tax nothing from nothing's nothing, right? And so I think the legislature's responded to those. Remember, we passed just a few years ago when oil was $10, $20, we passed a graduated severance based on the price on oil and gas. So I think we've been nimble to kind of watch the market and ease the burden when appropriate. So there's a lot to this story long before any of us were ever sworn in. And I think we just got to keep working on that. So I think, first of all, the severance tax system, what is it? I mean, it's basically a gross products tax on minerals. It's an income tax on mineral producers. I mean, it is this, however you want to call it, but it's incredible what it's done for the state. There's no doubt. If you look at, most states have that three-legged stool of property, income, and sales. We don't have that third of income because we have investment income from minerals. And it's really the permanent trust fund. So it's really incredible. So that's why we have the lowest tax burden in the United States. So there's a lot but I think, this is what we do. And I think folks before us did, and the folks that come after us will. So keep working on it, and reacting to these certain, current conditions. But I think it's a fascinating topic. And I think particularly, with the Trona soda ash boom, the soda ash boom is going on, and I think uranium is going to change. So I think it's a good time to look at it again. Any other? That was a long comment by me. Anybody here? Okay. Next one, Senator Beitman, go ahead.
Yeah, it looks like we have a duplicate here. We have from Jeff Doherty, ESG, and then a couple ones down, I submitted the exact same topic to take a look at what we can do to protect Wyoming interests from companies across the country engaged in economic boycotts against our fossil fuel industry, our firearms, our ag, whatever it may be. But if they're, the idea being if they're engaged in an economic boycott against us and what we do, we should, the state has tremendous purchasing power with our state contracts. And for us to say, well, we withhold the right to not do business with these companies that are trying to put us out of business. So I had a bill, actually, to backtrack. Last session, I brought a bill on ESG, didn't make it, proposed an interim topic to minerals, which I served on it. We all voted on it, but it never got heard in minerals. So I took it up as an interim topic myself, and I did all the work throughout the interim, traveled around, meeting with other legislators from across the country and other think tanks and everything like that to put together my 2 bills that I came up with. And certainly I don't want to have to do that again. I would like to do the interim topic route to get all the collective brain power behind it, so I don't have to go back to the drawing board again. I think it's an important issue it's becoming more and more of an issue in this country. And I think other states have already done this. They've dealt with this successfully to protect their interests. And I think Wyoming is kind of falling behind the game a little bit. We need to step up and protect our industries and our tax base for that matter. So that's the idea of this Senate File 159 engrossed. And I think it would, from a revenue, the reason why I picked revenue is because it does affect our revenue. If our fossil fuels go away, so does our education funding, and so does most of the revenue to fund this government that we operate. So I think it's very important we take a look at it and how can we protect that revenue source as best possible. Mr. Chairman.
Representative Locke has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say that I completely agree that this system is going to do its best to completely change the complexion of our state. That's what it's attempting to do. And I think this is a very, very important topic, whether, wherever it is, it absolutely needs to be an interim topic because it's going to become more and more critical to defending and protecting our not just our companies, but quite honestly, our revenue sources. I agree completely. Thank you.
Audience, want to comment on this? Okay, we're flipping over to page 8. Proposed topic on, this is an interesting, as you read through this, coming from former Speaker Luthi, works for Governor Gordon now as his energy policy advisor. I think this would be worth spending a few hours on this topic. It's interesting because our refineries are changing. The one in this town is changing, particularly. And anyway, any comments, members, or any thoughts? Anybody in the public? Okay. And then what's, and are these these are under your, Senator Biteman, right? Is that?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
Randall
Yeah.
came to me at the very beginning of session and asked if we could do this and I said, absolutely, that's a great idea. And then I realized revenue generation needs to start in the House, and we missed the vote. We missed the cutoff on starting a bill over on the House on this fee on renewable or biodiesel. Our biofuel is not used in Wyoming. So that's why I said, well, we'll have to take it up in the interim, and he put it in under me. So I agree. It wouldn't take a whole lot of time to discuss this, but it's an interesting proposal from the governor's office. And then this next one, I think we've already talked about it. It's this comprehensive review of the tax code to make the tax code more fair and equitable. Look at where there's different rates for different people, whether it's the severance tax rates, the property taxes. I think just taking that big picture look that we just discussed, and we've already put that one to bed. Same with this next one, that's a duplicate. So I think we're on to page 9 now, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
And Senator French, I think yours is next.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. My thinking here is like over a 5-year time frame, reducing, maybe not the residential, because Representative Locke and others are looking at maybe separating residential out from all other property. Just to, in my own case as a farmer, there's some equipment that I bought when I first started farming 50 years ago. Now think of that, 50 years ago. Not that I'm getting older, but I'm still paying property tax on that equipment. I've been paying property tax on that for 50 years. So my thinking was over like a 5-year time frame, reducing it 20%, so you have X amount of property, and each year, here's the start date, it reduces 20%. So in 5 years, your current property is over. You don't pay any more on it. Then if you add to your property, then that's when the clock starts running new. So maybe you add something the next year, well, the clock starts. Then the next year you add something, well, that you first added is in 40% off. The next one's 20. So if you see it, I just don't think you should pay on personal property for your entire life. I mean, just doesn't seem right. So that's kind of my thinking on it. And then that way we can see, it's a gradual reduction and we can see the effects of that. So that's where I'm coming from.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Pappas.
Yeah, well, I frankly don't like that tax anyhow. Probably ought to get rid of it, but it's no different than and I'm talking about tangible personal property. Okay. Not, but we do that on our homes though. I'm gonna, for the life of my home, I know I'm gonna pay a property tax on it. Unless we do something drastic here in this state, it's never gonna go away. But certainly on equipment, frankly, we do that with our vehicles, right? That first, on sales tax, right? That first year, we pay the full sales tax, and then it diminishes until some point we're at a minimum, and then we pay that minimum all the way. Maybe we could do that with this tax if we keep it. But I think it's valuable to look at it.
I think, no, like you mentioned vehicles, you pay a sales tax on vehicles and then the property tax. But I don't think farm equipment, I think that's an exemption. I don't think you pay sales tax. You buy a new tractor.
No. Mr. Chairman, no, I was just,
But I mean, when
I
you
was
brought
just
that
look-
in, I was confused on what.
yeah, I was just saying that a property tax, like I've paid property tax on my equipment and my business when I had a business every year, self-reporting, which I think is a big problem. And that's why it's hard to administer. Certainly I had competitors who didn't report all their stuff. Obviously, in my business, it's small fish. We're talking about computers in your desks and not big equipment like we're looking at in certainly in the mineral industry. They've got lots of tangible property that they have to pay tax on, but it's all self-reported. Our tax folks don't have the manpower to go out there and look at every piece. Yeah, maybe the big boys that play, that they do, but all I was getting at is we pay this, as Senator French said, we pay the same tax no matter, how long you have the equipment. And so maybe in that realm, there would be a graduated reduction as we do in sales tax for vehicles. So I wasn't saying.
I'm gonna ask the director to come up. And, and this is another area on this personal property, it's full of exemptions as well. I mean, we just added one in, I think, for drilling rigs that weren't working or were in the yard, we don't charge it. But anyway, I mean, so just talk about this a little bit.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Again, Brenda Henson. So on our vehicles, we pay sales tax at the transaction when we purchase that car. But then each year following, we pay a vehicle registration fee. And there's a state fee portion of that. And then there's what is the county fee portion that is based on the value of that vehicle. And you're right, Senator, every year, we do pay on that registration. Related to personal property for property tax purposes, as you stated, there are exemptions. The first one that we think of is personal property held and used for personal use. Historically, as citizens in Wyoming, we used to pay taxes on our refrigerators, our TVs, our furniture. The legislature put an exemption. But I will tell you that some of the old timers will tell you, that's how I knew the assessor's office, because they came out to see how many, did I still have a refrigerator? Did I still have a stove? Those are exempt from property taxation now. We also have a de minimis exemption for property taxation on personal property that was implemented, I believe it was 3 years ago. It's that $2,400, that if your personal property is less than that, then it's exempt from property taxation. Now, keep in mind, every time you grant an exemption, that puts that property tax burden on the taxable value. So that's something to keep in mind. We could address the items that you had indicated, Senator French, with an exemption. We know that different types of equipment have different life expectancies. The length of time I can use a computer is not the same length of time that I can use a piece of heavy industrial equipment. We could address that looking at the life expectancy of equipment. But what I would caution the committee is that we have counties in this state where over 50% of their total assessed value, local assessed value, not talking minerals, but their local assessed value is from personal property. You've got some counties in this state that if you exempted personal property, everybody's going to feel that. And so as we go through this, we'd be happy to provide that documentation information. But again, keeping in mind, what are taxes? Taxes are how we as citizens pool our resources to pay for services that we couldn't afford on our own. And we have the right as citizens to tax ourselves. We can vote and say, I want a service and improvement district because I need a road and I want it paved. So I'm willing to tax myself to pay for that road. So there's a balance here of protecting our citizens from high taxes and not taking away their rights as citizens to tax themselves. So I hope that helped with the personal property tax
Does. I think it'd
discussion.
be a good primer for us to, and Senator Pep, you're up next, actually, too, the next topic. So that's why I wanted you to kind of transition to this. It's under Senator Pappas, but your name there.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is the Department of Revenue's topic on what's taxable, so I'll let the director.
Yeah, go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, thanks again for sponsoring this topic. Talking about sales use, lodging tax, taxable versus non-taxable. From an administrative perspective and also from a policy perspective, exemptions have always been challenging in that exemptions are intended to recognize society's belief that that particular event, product, whatever it may be, that is so important to us as a government that we're going to exempt that transaction, knowing that that's going to put that burden on someone else. And so how do we, as a state in Wyoming, how do we track and make sure that the exemptions that we've put in place are accomplishing their intent? And it really hits home with economic incentive, economic development incentive types of exemptions. But along with that, as we talk about our sales use tax lodging structure, I think it's important for us to start with somewhat of a primer, just at the beginning. What is taxable? What isn't taxable? Where does the transaction occur? And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Administrator Fanning. Again, we've heard about simplification. How do we simplify our statutes so that everybody understands what is a taxable event and when is not? So with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Fanning, Department of Revenue. Mr. Chairman, do you remember this memo that I had provided to you at our last joint interim revenue committee meeting? And it was related to a reporting requirement that the Department of Revenue has. And Mr. Chairman, I know you get a ton of memos. Anyway, this memo outlined why the Department of Revenue has so many issues in trying to track exemptions. And so one of my proposals way back when, months ago, was this needed to be an interim discussion. And so this is something that comes up a lot. We have a variety of exemptions. We have dozens of them in our excise tax statutes. And the intent of this body is, hey, how do we track these? How can we tell how much tax is foregone based on these exemptions? And my answer has been, I can't tell you. And so that's a dive into this interim topic discussion is there a better way that the Department of Revenue can track these so that we can provide our legislature, provide all the citizens of Wyoming with informed decision-making on if that exemption is doing what it should be doing per legislative intent. Now, you piggyback that with, it has become a topic of this body saying, hey, let's simplify it. Let's simplify this tax code. Well, one of the questions that I receive every single day, right before I came here, is why is this so complicated? And so we've got discussions in here on well site taxability and digital products and manufacturing. And again, is there a way, again, it's not the department's policy decision if we want an exemption or imposition statute. It's just, can we clarify this for everyone to make it better so that the citizens of Wyoming know what's taxable and what's not? And so with that, Mr. Chairman, the department will stand for any questions.
Very good. And I mean, we currently look at some of those lost or whatever. I think we compare to our neighbors a little bit and extrapolate. South Dakota particularly similar, because they don't have many exemptions.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, yes, that is absolutely correct. So the department looks at the state of to our northeast. We look at them consistently because they're a regional partner. They don't have an income tax, and they also are a member of the streamlined sales tax agreement. And so there's a lot of consistencies. You throw in reservations. And so we do have a connection with them that makes comparisons much easier. They also do not have any extraction industries. So they do not have oil and gas. So they are also a very good comparison because it's what Wyoming would look like if we didn't have those industries.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You look at their property taxes and sales taxes. Wow. Ag taxes, South Dakota. Unbelievable. But okay, any further discussion? I think it's a
Mr.
fascinating topic for us to learn more.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Pappas.
Yeah, I do agree. I think this is, certainly it's going to be one of my priorities that I'll be forwarding to the good chairman. I really do, the easy thing is, oh, yeah, let's get rid of area exemption and we'll really simplify it. But it has some really huge consequences. Certainly for my county here, I mean, we probably wouldn't have data centers coming in if we didn't have those exemptions. So it's going to be a balancing act. Which exemptions do we keep and which exemptions do we, can we live without, can get rid of? So I really think it's an important thing for this committee to get their hands on, get a handle on. So I think it's a very important topic, and I thank the department for bringing it forward.
Hey, Director, any
Director,
follow-up?
just to follow up, related to, what we expect from our retailers, those folks, keeping in mind, when we get sales tax remitted to us, it's the seller, right, that collected the tax on behalf of Wyoming and remits it to us. So they don't necessarily know what the end user is going to do with that equipment. And so sometimes that's what's needed to know before an exemption can be granted. And so I think it's important for this committee to understand what information do we have and what information we don't have. And, to that extent, Also recognizing that Mr. Fanning has an entire group in his division, the taxability group, 5 individuals that spend every day answering taxability questions because our statutes aren't clear. And so they, and they want to give consistent guidance, but they are, for emails, letters, they spend 5 individuals all day long answering taxability questions. And the last thing we want is to spend taxpayer dollars on litigation. Let's just clear it up in statute. So with that, thank you very much for your time and
You put 3 hours on here for the topic. I think, this could be our one topic for the whole interim.
so Mr. Chairman, you know how long I take to talk.
Yeah, I know.
That was just me, 3
yeah.
hours.
Yeah.
Introduction speech.
Very good. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fanning, is that the memo on November 21st that you shared with the former Revenue Committee?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that's correct. Yes, ma'am.
Maybe reshare that with the new committee, it'd be wonderful. Okay, any further
Certainly
discussion?
can.
Okay, thank you. I would ask, any public comment? Okay, and I just asked one last time, any committee, any other topics, maybe you didn't make the deadline or you didn't, anything else? Here, you can kind of see there's, there's broad kind of categories here that these all kind of fit in. Okay, so next steps, then we'll,
Mr. Chairman,
oh, I'm sorry.
just
Senator Pappas.
at the beginning, you said we were going to look, we were gonna like select 5, prioritize 5 topics.
No,
Is
what we're
is that
gonna
what
do
we're
is
gonna do?
we're gonna send out like a Google survey
Ah.
form to each of you, and you can do that on your own and just kind of rank all these topics. But I would ask that
Mr.
staff kind of, some of these are related, kind of
Yes.
group them together. You won't see this list, but you'll see kind of, the property tax group and then the sales tax exemption type group. So that's kind of the idea behind it, simplify it a little bit. Is there everything's good with LSO? Hey, any other public comment? Members, do you have any other topics? Okay,
Going once, going twice.
so now then after we do our little survey and rank them, the committee chairman will get together and kind of look at our dates and our times, figure out what we think we can get done going into a session that's going to require the unholy, undemocratic 2/3 majority to even introduce a bill. I had to say that. Changed Constitution of 1973 to require a 2/3 vote, never in the original Constitution, but anyway. So, I think you got to keep that in mind. It's going to take a 2/3 vote to introduce any bills that we come up with and how much. So anyway, and then there'll be, Lord willing, an interim after that. And so let's continue our learning process as we keep learning about Wyoming's tax code. Okay, so with that, nothing else? Good. Okay, clears. Committee is adjourned. Thank you, members. Is there a question? Oh, yes, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick comment. I wanted to ask my colleague over here to the right of me if he'd start his business back up, if we could exempt his personal property taxes. That's all I had to say.
Very good. Okay, we're adjourned.